Hello, everyone, and welcome. Let me just check what we've got going on here before we kick off the pre-show. For those of you that are new, the pre-show is an opportunity to kind of ask any questions you want. I also would love if you've got specific questions. Feel free to throw them out there now, and we can discuss them now, or we can discuss them during the show, whichever time seems more appropriate. For right now, I'm going to go ahead and check the streams, make sure they're good. It looks like the Facebook one is good. LinkedIn, all of them are supposed to be up. Let's go and check out YouTube. YouTube's kind of taking the lead as the more preferred place for the show.
It looks like the Facebook one is good.
All right, yep, that's up, that's going. LinkedIn has always been sort of the one that doesn't really get things done. I guess is the way to put it. What in the world? That is a very weird one. Let's see. It's always so interesting that they don't... There it is. Okay. It is up. And I hear the audio, so we're good. That's really it. Those are really the only three that are... Well, I suppose I should check X too, huh? Just to be complete. I hope all has gone well with all of you since the last time we spoke. It's been a month. As always, we do these on the third Saturday of every month. And sort of check over the numbers, see where we're at. Oh yeah, it says live on my picture, and then it'll take me to it. That's really weird. You'd think they'd make it front and center on your profile page, but...
Take me to it.
There we go. All right, we're all good. Well, with that out of the way, let me take a quick moment to introduce myself for the new folks. My name is Robert Whitelaw. I'm a licensed real estate broker in the state of California. I have been serving the Silicon Valley area since 1988. As a real estate professional, and that is a very long time, seen an awful lot of different markets come and go, and helped people achieve their real estate goals regardless of what those conditions might be. If you'd like to reach out to me, there's a variety of ways to do it, but the easiest way to get access to those is to head over to soldbyrobert.com. You'll be able to click the Contact Robert button and find all the different ways to get in touch with me there. The goal today is to give you some insights into what's going on with our local real estate market. We're going to look at the most recent numbers, which is obviously for July, right? Because we don't have the numbers for August yet. Give us an opportunity to share a cup of coffee, which I'm stirring right now, loudly, just like I get for having a metal mug. My coffee of choice is actually a home brew. You know what? Maybe I'll make it... I'll put my big ugly face up there. See, there I am. Yep. Hi. Happy Saturday. And boy, I don't know how I look on the stream. Yeah, I look red. Jeez, I look like a tomato. I'm not sure why that is. I did change the resolution down to 1920 by 1080 just because last time we actually had an error about 30 minutes in. And I want to make sure it wasn't because I had the resolution set to the native 4K of the camera I'm using. But anyway, that's all silly technical behind the scenes stuff you don't care about. In terms of interesting things going on, if you watch my X posts, my X stream, I posted all the sort of a quick snippet of the local numbers of what we were seeing. Definitely some interesting stuff. And we're going to cover them in more detail today, obviously, which is what we do every month. But it'll be an opportunity for you to figure out, regardless of whether you're a buyer, seller, or an investor, what's going on in our local marketplaces. Are there any areas that should be getting your attention more than others, depending on what your goals are? Rents, we don't typically discuss rents a whole lot here, but rents are interesting. We can take a look on, there is one tool that I use all the time. The Reventure folks. And we'll have that up so that we can take a look at it if you like. Let's see here. The last time I looked at it, rents were actually down in a lot of areas, and even in areas where the rents weren't down, we're seeing huge incentives, like 3 months free rent kind of a thing, all kinds of other stuff. Let's see here. Let's see. I know it had rent. I don't usually look at rent, as I mentioned, but I could have sworn that there's the information I get on rent is usually from local news outlets. Okay, so rental rates. Let's go for rent for houses. Yeah, so house rent in Santa Clara County, $4,684 on average. Let's look by zip. $4,043. My son just signed a lease on a place. That was the last son I had left in the house. Not left in the house, that's not fair. All of them were out. And then one of them came back when he was thinking about making a big career change. And he's changed his mind. So he's going to go back to being what he is. And he decided to move to Alameda. And he was able to find a place for just over $2,000 a month. Let's see here. Let's see. Yeah. Okay. We've got about 5 minutes till the actual show starts. For those of you who would like to ask a question, make a comment, whatever floats your boat, feel free to do so in the chat. For everything but Facebook, I believe that your question will actually show up on the screen here, like right there. so right there. But obviously, I'll just answer the question here during the stream and repeat it so everyone gets a chance to hear what was asked. Let's see here. But it's interesting to sort of drive the various areas that I serve and help the people that I help. And see all the incentives. I mean, on huge billboards, they're advertising all these incentives and whatnot for folks to rent. And, the tools like this are great, but I find the absolute best place to know what is really going on is to check with like apartments.com, homes.com, not so much homes.com, but Trulia and Zillow under the rental areas. And I'm like stirring that right next to the microphone. Probably not smart. To see what things are renting for. You put in the parameters of what you'd look for and then see what it would rent for. there was some interesting discussions on the part of builders on why making entry-level homes is very difficult to make profitable. We've talked about that before on the podcast and on this live stream, where the reason for that is just all the regulations that are involved. Even if we just went back to what the regulations were like, say in 2000 to 2005, it would become far more affordable for builders to make entry-level homes. If you'll think back, for those of you who weren't alive, back in the olden days, in the early 2000s, late 1990s and early 2000s, home prices were just going nuts, right? And then we had the dot-com bubble burst in like 2000, 2001, 2002. Then there was the ramp up to 2007 where we had the huge crash. And leading up to that, all of the local and state governments were salivating at the potential revenue they were missing out on of all these homes that were selling for incredible amounts of money. So their solution to that problem of them taking more of our money was to create more regulations, more hoops to jump through to build a house so that the builders have to absorb those costs. Well, of course, a builder doesn't absorb anything. A builder passes on costs to the consumer. So what you saw was a narrowing of profit margins at certain levels, right? If you're doing an entry-level home, there's price ranges that you would need to meet just as someone who's looking to satisfy a market that just aren't realistic. If you're building that house, there simply wouldn't be enough people. The house would still cost too much for the people you'd be aiming it at, right? As an entry-level home. So when you consider profit margins at the end of the transaction, it ends up making a lot more sense to build luxury homes. There's a bigger margin on them. If the local and county, state governments had all stayed out, had simply said, it's not our job to screw you out of more and more money simply because this part of the market is doing so well at that point, we wouldn't be having this problem. But what's interesting is none of those regulations, none of those costs, none of those fees went away after the downturn. There was no big rush to suddenly say, wow, okay, well, now we need to reduce these back to pre-2006 levels or 2005 or 2004 levels so that the market can thrive for consumers. No, none of that. All those things are still in place. Some of you might even remember, right? There were all kinds of goofy things. There were people who would buy a house, change the CC&Rs on that house, on a single family home, not in a HOA, and add a stipulation that every time the home sold, such and such a corporation or person would get 1% of the sales price, right? And those were made illegal. I mean, those were finally dealt with. But, what we have to understand is the mindset of wanting to get more out of a transaction is real. And it's a universal human instinct for an awful lot of folks. So that's kind of where it led us. All right, we are just ticking over here. It is 10 a.m. It is exactly 10 a.m. Hello. Welcome to the Coffee and Real Estate Live Chat. My name's Robert Whitelaw. I'll be your host this morning for this wonderful just parade of data that's going to come your way, hopefully in a way that informs you more than it annoys you. As I said, I'm Robert Whitelaw. I'm a licensed real estate broker in the state of California. I have been licensed in the state of California since 1988. And as I mentioned in the pre-show that we started about 15 minutes ago, I've helped people through all sorts of different markets, whether it was a buyer's market, a seller's market, whatever. And I've been there to help folks achieve those goals that they might have. So if you're interested in achieving some of those goals yourself and you would like to chat with someone who's been doing this for a very long time, feel free to reach out to me. My website is soldbyrobert.com. And I'd be happy to help you, at the very least, talk through your situation and see what your realistic options are. I'm very much a no BS kind of guy. So at least you can count on absolutely honest answers that are not designed to push you one direction or another. If it doesn't make any sense for you to sell your house, I'm going to tell you that, in my opinion, it's probably best for you not to sell your house. If I believe that your best option in facilitating your retirement, given your current numbers and what's going on with your house, it might make more sense for you to rent your house, which I can't help you with, and then still move to that place you want to go, but still rent this house while you're in your retirement. Anyway, but just an honest assessment. Of course, in the end, it's your decision on what does and doesn't happen. And if you do want to buy, sell, or invest in real estate, I would love to help you. All right. So for those of you who might be new, And it looks like we've got a few people right now in the stream. Thank you very much for joining me. I appreciate you spending your Saturday morning with me. I hope you have your favorite coffee with you. I'm going to apologize for all the clanking noises that are going to happen every time I go to drink some of my coffee. Mine's a mocha, so I have to stir it a little bit before I drink it each time. For all the stuff I have in it. And if you ever want to have a coffee chat, come to the pre-show, and I'll tell you exactly how I make my mocha. Which is obviously not a real estate topic. Okay, let's go ahead and jump in here. And let me get that out of the way. But let's go ahead and jump in. And talk numbers. And there we go. Those are the starting points. So let me clarify. If you're new, welcome to it. I appreciate it. Every month we sit down, we chat about the numbers, the ones that influence our markets the most from the previous month, right? Because those are the most recent numbers we have. Obviously, we're going to be covering July of 2026 this time around. But the goal here is to get you calibrated to where things are. We look back to try to see where we've been and where things might go from here. So there will be a little bit of crystal ball gazing, I guess you could say, as part of this, and using historical data to inform predictions, right? So it's not just me pulling something out of thin air. And if it is me pulling something out of thin air or going with my gut, I'll make sure to point that out so you know the difference. Okay, so let's go ahead and start off with the total homes in the market. For those of you who are sellers, this number represents your competition. How many other sellers are out there trying to get their home sold at the same time you're trying to get your home sold? And for you buyers, this is how many homes are out there on the market for me to consider purchasing during the month of July. And we can see that in Santa Clara County, it was up 6% compared to the same time last year. And all the numbers we're going to be covering for this first segment of slides is comparing year over year. Month over month, for predictive purposes, is sometimes nice, but year over year is the number you want. When someone tells you, oh, there was a huge change from January to February or February to March, that is not useful unless you know what the seasonal influences are for those markets. Because we all know that trying to buy or sell a home in July is very different from trying to buy or sell a home in December. Two totally different set of circumstances, right, for that time of year. So this way we're eliminating seasonal influences from the discussion entirely. All right. So in Santa Clara County, it was 2,165 homes last year in July of 2025. And in July of 2026, it went up to 2,286. So an increase in inventory of 6%. Good for buyers. It's always good to have more products on the shelf to look at versus sellers who probably don't want quite as much competition for the eyeballs of those people who want to buy. Next, in San Jose, it was up 5%. It was 1,115 last year, 1,175 in July of 2026 for a 5% jump. Morgan Hill, 127 homes last year in July of 2025 and 129 in July of 2026 for a 2% increase. Now, just a quick comment about sample size, right? The reason why I do the county and then drill down to San Jose, Morgan Hill, and Gilroy is because for general trends and being able to make good judgments, you need more data. And the biggest chunk of data we've got is the county level. Because obviously there's thousands of things happening at the county level rather than hundreds or dozens. And when you get down to 100 or dozens of samples, the ability of that data to get skewed really big one way or the other by a single transaction dramatically increases, right? So that's the reason I point that out. Is for the purposes of sample size, what we can say about Morgan Hill is it's pretty much a wash. There is no way to say the market has made a big shift in inventory because there were 127 homes last year and 129 homes this year, just based off of statistical realities, right? So basically flat, basically a stable market is the best conclusion we can come to as it relates to Morgan Hill. Gilroy, big enough difference to maybe make note. But it's 21% down from last year. So there are 117 homes available for sale in Gilroy in July of 2025. And in July of 2026, that's down to 92. So that's in terms of just real numbers, in terms of reality on the ground, if you're a buyer looking for a place or you're a seller who's competing with other sellers, that's a pretty substantial drop. That's going to do nothing but increase the interest in Gilroy simply because, well, it's going to work out better for sellers because the price point payoff in Gilroy is pretty nice right now. So that actually kind of works in Gilroy's advantage, particularly since other numbers indicate things had slowed down a bit there. So we'll see how things go as we hit more numbers. But in general, we wouldn't call what's happening in Gilroy stable like we would in Morgan Hill. We would call that a definite, detectable, clear decline in the overall inventory for homes there. Okay. I don't know why that did that dinging sound. Let's see here. Let's go ahead and do this. All right. Next, we're going to go ahead and talk about the total number of new listings, and this just represents homes that came on the market. So to set the stage for this, a real estate agent sat down with a home seller, a homeowner who wanted to become a seller, had them sign a listing agreement, and then that real estate agent entered that home into the multiple listing service to then get aggregated out to the Zillows and the Trulias and the Redfins and Homes.com, everywhere else. And this is the number of people whose real estate agent entered that data in the month of July. So it went on the market. The very first time buyers saw that that home was available for sale was in July. And we saw that in Santa Clara County, there was a 13% increase from the same time last year. Last year, 1,349 people listed their home for sale versus 1,526 this year in July of 2026. That's kind of an interesting number, right? Despite the fact that we saw a increase in listings of 13%, so a double-digit increase in the total number of listings, we saw only a 6% increase in the total number of active listings, right? So an interesting comparison point there. In San Jose, we saw an increase as well from 700 homes in July of 2025 to 801 homes in July of 2026 for a 14% overall increase. Morgan Hill, similarly, 13% increase, 68 homes last year, 59 homes this year, but in the other direction, it went down. Similar number, but in the opposite direction. So it was down 13%. In Gilroy, up 20%. We saw 46 homes last year, 55 homes this year in July of 2026. So again, because of sample size, I'm not going to make any huge sweeping generalizations or assumptions about what those two numbers mean for Morgan Hill and Gilroy. I would call it, again, we could simply call it more of a stable situation, but it's more homes on the market in Gilroy in the month of July. Now, what's interesting about July is while we do sometimes see that be the time when everything gets listed, it tends to be May, June timeframe. So it's interesting to see more homes coming on the market in July. It'll be interesting to see what happens in August in terms of overall trends to see if folks are coming onto the marketplace late. August is, no question about it, a late entry into the quote-unquote season of real estate, right? Often people like to consider July as the peak of the season. The numbers tend to indicate that in terms of number of sales, June tends to be that time. But this is the folks who come on the market in July are a little later to the game than they should have been, particularly in the market we're in now. I would have suggested they come on the market in May. But it'll be interesting to see where these folks go and to see how this leads to accumulation of inventory as we move out the rest of the year. Next, let's go ahead and take a look at the total number of homes sold. Now, in July of 2025 in Santa Clara County, we saw 1,019 homes sell in July of 2025, and we saw 1,003 homes sell in July of 2026 for a 2% drop. San Jose saw a 1% increase, so basically a wash. 509 homes last year, 512 homes this year. In Morgan Hill, we saw a 10% increase, 39 homes in July of 2025, 43 homes in July of 2026. And in Gilroy, we saw a 8% increase, 36 homes last year, 39 homes this year. And again, because of the sample size, we can just call that flat. I would say that's simply a stable market from the same time last year when being compared. But if we take a look at the total number of homes that were listed, did we add homes or did we subtract homes? So we sold 1,003 in the county, but we listed 1,526. So that's a net increase of 523 homes to the inventory overall, right, in the month of July. Now, when at our peak months in the past, we've seen markets where we sell more homes than we list overall. It will be really embarrassing if I dribble coffee all over myself while in a live chat. I just don't feel like that's the way to set the tone. Morgan Hill up 10%. Did I already say that? 39 homes last year, 43 homes this year for an increase of 10%. Gilroy up 8%, 36 homes last year, 39 homes this year. Again, pretty much across the board on Morgan Hill and Gilroy, I'd just call it flat. It's relatively, and heck, even for the county overall, that's just a 2% variation is definitely more in the region of saying a flat number of sales. Now, why am I kind of pausing here? There's been a lot of talk about increased sales that have happened in July, and we're just not seeing that here. We're going to see a Zillow thing. I believe it's the Zillow article that talks about increase. I think it was increased sales. If I end up being wrong, I'll apologize. But the bottom line is in a lot of other markets where they're seeing increases in sales, we're not. So that's just a reality that folks need to get used to. And again, within this, there are submarkets, right? Within San Jose, there are some ridiculously appealing neighborhoods where when homes come on the market, they sell immediately for multiple offers. And that still continues to be true. Kind of true in Morgan Hill, kind of true in Gilroy. There are definitely some areas in Gilroy, northwest and northeast Gilroy, still very hot. Anything near, I can't remember the name of the high school. My next door neighbor used to be the principal there. I almost sent my kids there. I almost moved there just to send my kids there. Well, I don't know. At some point it'll come to me. But those are just definitely areas that are super popular and continue to be to the point where they tend to sell pretty quickly. And particularly this time of year, when you're talking about the June, July, August timeframe, if you're catering to people who Christopher High School, I knew I'd get it eventually. If you have folks who care about the schools in the area, that's when that particular piece of data matters most. It matters a little bit less in other times of year because some families are simply saying, I'm not going to interrupt my kid's school year, so I'm not even going to look for a house in October, November, December, January, February, March, April. So you as a home seller, if you've got a home in one of those areas, particularly something that's tied to education, I know I've given plenty of advice to folks that are probably your better time to go on the market is January and February. That's not true for you. You have to understand what the most appealing things about your property are and cater to them and how you market them. And timing is part of marketing as much as anything else. So just keep that in mind. Whether it's schools or something else, keep that in mind. All right, next on the bill here. You know what? One thing to cover real quick. So yes, in every case, every community that we have listed here added homes to the inventory, but by how much? So Santa Clara County added, you know what, I'm going to, just for the sake of visually being correct. What have I done? Dear Lord. Holy moly, how far have I gone here? Homes sold. There we go. We'll go there. All right. Sorry. You know what? Maybe this is something I should put on the slide instead of just reading it off. So in terms of total number of homes added to the market, in Santa Clara County, it was 523 homes were added to the market. We're subtracting total number of listings. We're subtracting homes sold from total number of new listings. And that gives us 523 homes added. In San Jose, that number is 289 homes added to the marketplace. In Morgan Hill, it was 16 homes. And in Gilroy, it was 16 homes. So all across the board, homes added to the overall inventory. An accumulation of inventory in the month of July is you usually tend to see those numbers from being like this, being out of balance to the point where we're adding so many homes to inventory. Normally, that's not the case. We'll see how this plays out as we go further down the line here in the year. But that's something that stands out to me as something to make note of. Okay, months of inventory. This is a number that's kind of interesting. Basically what we are saying here is, let's say that for the month of July, we froze the total inventory and froze the number of homes sold. Under those circumstances, if we had that base inventory frozen where it is and we sold the same number of homes in July, every following month, how long would it take to sell off all the inventory? Nationally, a balanced number for this is typically considered to be 4.5 months of inventory is a balanced market. Anything over 4.5 months is a buyer's market. Anything below that is a seller's market. So as you can see, we still remain well below the mark of being into a seller's market. So in Santa Clara County, we had a 10% overall increase from the same time last year. It was 2.1 months of inventory last year in July of 2025 in Santa Clara County. It's up to 2.3 in July of 2026. In San Jose, it's up 5%. 2.2 months of inventory in July of 2025. 2.3 months of inventory. Let me turn this off because that's a buzzing sound you guys can probably hear. In San Jose, 5% increase, 2.2 months of inventory in July of 2025 to 2.3 months of inventory for July of 2026. Morgan Hill down 9%, 3.3 months of inventory last year, 3 months of inventory in July of 2026. And in Gilroy, down 27%, 3.3 months of inventory in July of 2025 versus 2.4 months of inventory in July of 2026. So, given what we're seeing, these numbers kind of make sense to me. Gilroy is getting a lot more attention now, and we're going to see sort of why that is in some upcoming numbers. But we're looking at a more stable situation for Santa Clara County overall and San Jose specifically, with inventory numbers obviously coming down to the point and sales numbers meeting them enough that the months of inventory numbers are going down in both Morgan Hill and Gilroy. All right. Let's see what we got here this is for homes pending and contingent. Now, this means a offer was accepted. And for the purposes of the way the MLS works, it also means that buyers signed off on all contingencies. When you go into escrow, when you first get that offer accepted, you go into contingent, meaning the buyer still has things they can do that could potentially allow them to exit the transaction without any penalty. So that's things like loan conditions, inspection conditions, disclosure conditions, those kinds of things. And there's a certain amount of time that's allowed for those things to happen. And once they happen, the buyer is supposed to sign off on contingencies. And when they sign off on all contingencies, it goes from contingent to pending. Pending simply means there are no contingencies left in play. So it's very likely that the transaction is going to close, right? Okay. One reason to care about this is it's a predictor of how many homes will be sold in the following month or month and a half. Since escrows are typically 30 to 45 days, if you've gone pending, right, that's the natural thing. So we want to see, where are we going with this? Are we higher than last year? Are we lower than last year? And trending wise, where are we at? So let's go ahead and start off with Santa Clara County. We can see we're down from last year when it was 1,013 homes went pending in July of 2025. July of 2026, that dropped down to 950. In San Jose, it was down 6% as well. 517 homes were pending in July of 2025 versus 486 in July of 2026. Morgan Hill down 23%, 47 homes last year, 36 homes in July of 2026. And in Gilroy, down 2%. So very, very steady in Gilroy again. 42 homes last year, 41 homes this year, which I think is an indicator of what's happening with the market in Gilroy, where things are tending to be pretty stable, whereas in other markets we're starting to see more of a decline reflected. Let's see here. Next, the average original sales price. So a few ways I like to use this number. So the reason why I use the original list price is it's a way to get a peek. Do you know the number of pending dropped? Let me see. I just got a comment. The Rent Hacker, how you doing? Do you know why the number of pending dropped? Yeah, the fewer offers accepted, right? So that's a direct reflection of how many buyers pulled the trigger on a contract, right? And then sellers accepting it. So those are the two things that have to happen. There has to be a buyer that wants to buy and has submitted a contract, and there has to be a seller that says, I like that contract, I accept it. Then it gets entered as a pending transaction in the MLS, which then goes out to everything. So a lot of people don't realize all of these different websites are not separate websites in terms of the data pool, right? They all pull from, well, it's a little more complicated, but in general, they all pull from the multiple listing service, right? Through the APIs that connect them to that service. Of course, they also each have their own, you can enter it manually on our site stuff, which means that once you enter it into Zillow, it's only going to be in Zillow. But I believe they also aggregate to Trulia, since the same folks own both Zillow and Trulia. But I'm sorry, I'm being distracted by the shiny things. That's why pending goes down, right? So if you wanted to step back and think, okay, what are the causes for that? There's a variety of things I think at play. First of all, I think that the number isn't sellers are turning down more offers, which is obviously one side of that equation. I think the side of the equation that's more real is fewer buyers are making offers. And I think there's a couple of reasons for that. One, interest rates stunk in July, right? Really bad. If I'm not mistaken, we may see some numbers later that show that they were the highest numbers of the year, highest numbers since a while ago. I don't know. We're going to look. I promise. But that's really it. So less activity on the buyer side is, I think, the actual explanation for that drop. Now, what do I see anecdotally, right? I think I've mentioned before, I've got hundreds of people currently with active searches through my tools that I provide. A few, probably fewer than 100, probably in the 70 to 80 person range. Right now, that number fluctuates, are super active looking, meaning because I can see when they look at stuff, right? So if I send them a message that says, here's the latest results for your home search, if they click on them, then I get a notification that they clicked on them. If they click on specific houses, I get a notification. And that sounds a little bit creepy, but it's helpful because it lets me then go in and take a closer look at that property through data sources they don't have access to. And then I'll reach out to them and go, hey, saw you were checking this property out. Here's some additional data that you might not be aware of relating to it, that kind of thing, right? Because I'm trying to help them find what they want. And I've noticed a dip in the super active activity. For me, super active means looking at things at least weekly, right? And I've noticed a dip in that anecdotally from my personal experience with folks I'm working with. I hope I answered that for you. I may have even answered it too much. All right, so average original list price is, again, it's a way to get a peek into the mind of sellers. Where was their head at? How much did they think they were going to get? How much did they want to get? Because that first number is what everyone in a room, what sellers in a room sitting with an agent agreed, you know what, let's throw this number out there for the universe to make an offer on, right? So it's a great way to look at the mindset. And let's take a look at what we saw in Santa Clara County. Now, I've mentioned before that we've had in the past double-digit jumps in this number in terms of expectations, what sellers want to get. And boy, did we see that in Santa Clara County and San Jose. Now, San Jose, despite the large numbers of homes, the hundreds, sometimes thousands of homes in the mix, can still have numbers skewed by crazy stuff. Because I think in San Jose, one reason why this number is so high is, and we'll get to this in a minute, is there was actually one or two listings that were like crazy high, like tens of millions listings that threw this off. But Santa Clara County overall, we saw last year $1,892,751 was the average original list price. This year, in July of 2026, $2,097,024 for a 10.8% jump. And it looks like we've got several people watching, 3 there and maybe a couple of more on YouTube. So feel free to chime in if you've got any other questions. I appreciate the question, Rent Hacker. Much rather have you ask it there than in an email later so no one else could hear it, which is a crazy jump. But again, those things can also, because Santa Clara County also includes San Jose, the same crazy things that happen in San Jose with very high listings would affect, obviously, the county numbers as well. 29.2% increase in San Jose. It was $1,437,371, and that peaked out in July of 2026 at $1,856,869 as the average original list price. Morgan Hill was up 6.5%, $1,445,230 in July of 2025, jumping to $1,539,316 in July of 2026. Finally, Gilroy. And this is another reason why I keep kind of pausing on Gilroy. down 19.7%, $1,446,196 versus $1,161,770. Now think about this. You know, if you have a screen name the Rent Hacker, it suggests to me that you might be an investor-styled guy or gal. What do you do with that information? Right? If you're looking for sexy markets where things are going on, and you're, because obviously one thing that a guy or gal that wants to rent things out wants to know where buyers are going, or at least understand the dynamics of why people who could potentially be renters of your stuff are looking to buy somewhere else, and then trying to figure out what niche do I satisfy by appealing to those folks. Gilroy presents an interesting case study for you where prices are going down. And we'll see here in a minute, we'll get some numbers on what about price over under asking price, right? Which is an indicator of multiple offers. And you as a person who wants to do rental stuff, right? You want to be an investor. Markets where homes aren't always selling for over asking price is an attractive thing for you, where there's a little bit more stress on the market, where the probability of a seller entertaining a below asking offer price is higher, right? So Gilroy should be a place you might want to look. But what's the dynamics? What are the trade-offs, right? Obviously, commute. When I'm talking to people who are looking to buy and potentially considering Gilroy, it's the commute. That is their number one thing. They work somewhere in San Jose, Santa Clara, Sunnyvale, Cupertino, wherever it is. And increasingly, I'm finding folks have much more flexible commuting options, not meaning that they don't have to commute. Maybe meaning they only go into the office 2 days, 3 days a week, meaning they don't have to be there at 9 a.m. They don't have a clock to punch. So they have to go into the office, but they don't have to leave at 8:15 to get to work by 9. They could leave at 9:15. They could leave at 10, right? So increasingly, that's a thing that I see with folks who are looking to move to Gilroy. But you can get so much more for your money right now in Gilroy than most other places that it's really hard to fault someone for thinking, well, I'm going to go ahead and save $300,000 and I'm still going to get that 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 1,500, 1,600 square foot home, but I'm not going to spend an extra $500,000 on it. So I could drive 15 minutes less, right? Right? Understanding those dynamics helps. Whether you're trying to market a property as a real estate guy like myself, to who's most likely going to respond positively to a listing and then make an offer, to I'm an investor guy or gal and I want to figure out what the dynamics are of my customers, which could be someone who's trying to buy, and where you can entice them with, hey, I got a beautiful home right here, South San Jose, wherever. It's only going to cost you X amount. Your mortgage on a house like this would be X amount. You're going to save this many thousands of dollars a month by renting from me. And of course, that level of desperation only comes in when people stop pinging your Trulia ad or your Zillow ad for your rental property. And boy, I realize this is, again, shiny thing off in the weeds. Please, if you have a home that you're trying to rent, can you stop taking photos with your cell phone? They suck. And in the name of everything holy, put the toilet seat down before you take a picture. Just, please. Even if someone doesn't consciously think to themselves, wow, that gross toilet seat is up, there is a subconscious negative response that someone won't be able to explain, and they'll click to the next property available. So anyway, sorry. All right. So I think we covered these numbers and a whole lot more. We were on the bonus program on this slide because I went way off in the weeds. I apologize for that. Okay. Let's go ahead and cover the next slide here. Okay, and this is the money shot. Everybody loves this. How much do things actually sell for? And we're going to do a little comparing and contrasting between average original price and the sales price, because there's always interesting nuggets there, right, in terms of us figuring out what the heck's going on. Why did that change? The Rent Hacker says, another thing I really like looking at is average ratio of original list price to sale price, especially during this pre-IPO craze. And we'll be looking at that number in just a minute, my friend, so stay tuned. The percent over under asking price is basically a direct comparison to not original list price. I don't compare it to original list price. I compare it to list price, which is whatever it was at the time the buyer looked at the listing, because I want to get into the mindset of the buyer and how much they were willing to offer over or under the price they were looking at the time they bought the house. So I think that's a more valuable number. You might disagree. We can always cover the other number at some other point. All right, so average sales price. Now notice how there are no double-digit numbers here, right? Everything's below 4.1%, at 4.1% or lower. Or excuse me, no, 3.9 or lower, so below 4%. While all of the, boy, I hope I get this amount, not all. We had a downturn in Gilroy, which was just them being very calibrated to what's going on in the market. But at 10.8 in the county, almost 11% higher wished for amount. Pretty crazy. So, all right. But we're also going to see here in a minute, because we're going to compare these two, how much above or below expectations were we, right? Did we meet expectations? Did we beat them in terms of what sellers hoped for versus what they got? So we'll see here. All right. Now remember, these are real numbers. This isn't, gee, what might something be worth? This is an escrow closed, a number got entered into the system of what it sold for, and this is the real number. So in Santa Clara County, it was up 3.6% from the same time last year. So from last year, $1,939,278. This year, $2,009,207, which is just nuts, right? An average priced home, $2 million. So crazy, right? But in San Jose, numbers down 3.9%. 1,542,202 was July of 2025. July of 2026, 1,482,575. And in Santa Clara County, there's a lot of different places where we get some crazy markets where things are going for much more. So I think that, but San Jose has that too. Morgan Hill down 3.7%. $1,489,936 was last year's number for July of 2025. For July of 2026, $1,434,488. And Gilroy down 4.1%. And see, again, I'm pausing. Notice the dramatic pause on Gilroy. Another reason why Gilroy is sexy. Another reason why I would move to Gilroy. Now, I wouldn't move anywhere in Gilroy. Are there some parts of Gilroy I'm not a huge fan of? Yeah. There's parts of Morgan Hill I'm not a huge fan of. There's parts of San Jose, but it's also about me and my personal stuff, right? It's something that I might find annoying, another person might not, and think that's just fine. And that's the way of the world, right? So in Gilroy, $1,211,055, $1,160,865 in July of 2026, where, as I said, a 4.1% drop. Now let's pause and think about this for a second, because these numbers are also interesting. How much off of original list price are these actual sales numbers? In other words, the seller's dream number. How does it compare to what the home ended up selling for in the month of July? All right. So in Santa Clara County, despite the fact we had a 3.6% increase in the overall sales price, in terms of expectations, sellers missed expectations by $87,817, right? So a good chunk of change. It gets worse. In San Jose, where we were down 3.9% overall in sales price, from expectations, they missed it by $374,294 on average. And that's the worst. That was the worst city. In Morgan Hill, what we saw was a difference of $104,828. So expectations in July were $104,828 above what they actually got. And here's the interesting one. So Gilroy also missed it by like $905, right? And for my money, anything under $5,000, $10,000, that's pretty well calibrated to reality. In other words, what folks expected on the seller side matched pretty close with what buyers were willing to pay and what things actually sold for. And that's great. I love to see a market that tends to be more in line with the realities of its local market. And San Jose, in a lot of areas, isn't. Morgan Hill historically has been way out of whack in terms of expectations versus realities, which has often resulted in huge price reductions on various houses. And we're going to talk about price reductions in a bit here. Okay. If anyone has any questions about that, because that's usually a big one where folks might want to know more things, but I know the rent hacker is already very excited to talk about percent over under asking price. So we're going to go ahead and jump into that. So here we go. And that's not what I meant to do. I did something different. Now I did what I meant to do. So here we go. And boy, this is a great number. It tells you a lot of different things. So what we're looking at here is the percent of asking price. And if the asking price is 100%, and that's what it is, 100% equals the home sold for what it was advertised for at the time. Anything above or below represents either getting over asking price or below asking price. So overall, on average, in Santa Clara County, last year in July of 2025, homes were selling for 102.2% of asking price, meaning buyers were offering 2.2% on average over asking price. In July of 2026, that dropped down to 1.9% over asking price for a 0.3% overall change from year to year. Okay. In San Jose, we saw 102% last year in July of 2025, or 2% above asking price, to 101% in July of 2026, or 1% over asking price on average. And for those of you who've been with me for a while, who've watched any of the ones I've done over these years, you know that there have been times when this was 100. We've seen years where this was 110%, 109%, 112. We've seen crazy numbers here. So this is a huge softening that's happened over the last few years in these numbers. All right, Morgan Hill up 0.6%, 99.5% last year. So homes on average sold for 0.5% below asking price in Morgan Hill in July of 2025. In July of 2026, they sold for 0.1% over asking price. And because of our sample size, again, that's really a wash in my mind, right? So the market is pretty much on par with what it was last year. In Gilroy, 0% change. 99.5% last year, 99.5% this year for July in 2025 and 2026. So we've got all of these things. We've got average original list price down almost 20%. So expectations on the part of sellers, coming into it on average with lowered expectations than a year ago. We have average sales prices down by 4.1% in Gilroy, which actually puts them much more on par with what the realities are in their marketplace. We have homes sold up 8%. We have new listings up 20%, which was the highest. And we have total active listings of 92, but that's a 21% drop from the same time last year. So all of this, the interesting decrease in inventory really kind of tells the story. We have diminished supply overall, but all these other things that are influencing it. And I think that just points towards more activity in the Gilroy market. Anything, since you actually brought it up before I brought it up, Rent Hacker, is there any questions you want to ask about this, or any perspective you want to offer in terms of finding out more information on stuff that you're interested in? I also consider this to be a super interesting number, and because it's a little bit of a look into the psychology of buyers, of how much above or below asking price they were able to get a deal, or how much they were willing to offer above in some cases. All right, next. Let's talk about days on market. No surprises here. There is no oh my moment with days on market. This is precisely what you would expect. The only thing that I tend to do every single time we talk about this number is point out that if you're seeing numbers that all tend to be the same, like 14, 15, 16, 17 days on market, that's not a real number, because real estate agents will list a home and say, we will not entertain offers until such and such a date. And that tends to be a week or two after the home has been listed, because they want to make sure as many eyeballs as possible get on the property. They want to facilitate those open houses so people can come in. One side note on open houses, still to this day, real estate agents poo-poo open houses because they don't want to do them. And they'll say, well, the open house isn't to sell your home. The open house is for the real estate agent to get more clients. And that's an interesting self-deprecating way of approaching that discussion, but it's also wrong. Back in the olden days, open houses were great just so it could facilitate a buyer to at their leisure go and look at a house. But they were almost always escorted by an agent. If you wanted to get into a house, you needed to either do the open house or you needed to have a real estate agent with a realtor key to get into that lockbox, right? To get into a house. The reality today is there are so many more people that are doing this searching process without using a real estate agent. And it's been true now for several years, at least several years, probably more like a decade, that I don't even know why am I even, well, I'm doing as another shiny thing. In other words, the point I'm getting at is if your agent says you don't need any open houses, they're wrong. You need at least 2. I think 4 is the real number. I think you list a home, you give enough time before you're willing to accept offers that you have 2 weekends, so you can do Saturday and Sunday and have an open house both days. That is, from my money, for a statistical standpoint, a sweet spot to get you an offer. For me, that has always worked. Now, I've had some weird scenarios where did a home, did the 2 weeks, didn't get an offer, which is shocking. I do a huge pivot on my marketing when that happens. But what's funny is someone who had come to the last open house did end up buying the home, but they ended up buying it like 3 weeks later, making an offer on it 3 weeks later or something like that. But anyway. So anything over 17 or 18 days max is a real organic number, meaning it really took that long to get that home sold because it's a number of days well beyond the approximately 2 weeks that a real estate agent would artificially delay the sale of a home. Does that make sense? I know I may have overdone there. So let's have a little coffee to see if that helps. Okay. So 23% increase in Santa Clara County overall from 26 days in July of 2025 to July of 2026. 38% increase in San Jose from 24 days in July of 2025 to 33 days in July of 2026. Morgan Hill up 29, 31 days in July of 2025, 40 days in July of 2026. And Gilroy has the smallest increase, but it was already living at a point that was a little bit nuts. So 40 days to get a home sold in July of 2025, 44 days to get a home sold in July of 2026. I think, yeah, there's also this idea, if you think back to how many new listings we got, that's a great question. So the Rent Hacker, who's now my favorite person in the chat, well, I think he's the only one in that particular chat. What causes a certain market to be more aligned than others like Gilroy versus San Jose? And if Gilroy is so much more aligned, why does it have the highest days on market? That's a great question. I think circumstances force alignment. And I know that's a little bit nebulous. It's almost like I'm running for president kind of an answer. But the reality is Gilroy for a very long time has not been a community of choice for folks working in Silicon Valley. And it's had its moments of big challenges back when the big downturn happened. I don't know if people who were alive and reading the news back then, remember the number of homes that had been foreclosed on or bought really super cheap were suddenly became grow houses. And there was all these nasty stories coming out of Gilroy about what different criminal organizations were doing with homes they were buying for $300,000 or $200,000. So it was all very creepy and very horrible. Every once in a while, you'll get something like that. But in terms of calibration, I think, and I am loath to give real estate agents credit for much of anything because I've met a whole lot of them and I'm not a fan. But that some of it we have to attribute to them, right? Because they walked into a living room and they said, here's what the comparables are. This is what I think you should list your home for. And if their listing appointments go anything like mine, it is very common for sellers to believe their home is worth quite a bit more than the market will support, right? So that calibration is coming from somewhere, and listing agents are communicating it. So that's good news. But I think it's also the fact that for those homes that did try to sell at these higher prices, they never sold, and sellers see that, or they see homes that stayed on the market forever and forever and forever, and they're responding to it. part of the answer, I think, is also I don't know. These are all guesses. I promised at the beginning of the stream that if I'm pulling anything out of thin air or just making stuff up, I'd fess up. And I think there's a lot of that here. I think things have just been harder in Gilroy longer than other markets, so they've had time to learn the lessons. Whereas in Santa Clara County in general, in San Jose and Morgan Hill, there hasn't been a whole lot of that. There hasn't been a whole lot of pain. I think for a lot of markets, there's been a lot of pain in Gilroy. And I also think that as we see increases in sales, particularly in Gilroy, we have to recognize that as those sales increase. So one thing that's, and this is something for you definitely, Rent Hacker, to understand, when you see a big jump in days on market, that is not an indicator of a down market. Normally, unless they're consistently at a super high number, normally it's the indication of a jump in activity. Why? Because properties that have been on the market forever are suddenly selling, right? Which is why you see a big jump in days on market in the January, February timeframe in just about all of these communities. Why? No one was buying in November and December. So a lot of properties accumulated and nothing really was getting sold at the same rate. So suddenly a lot of buyers come out and we see a big jump in days on market because suddenly we're selling off older inventory that's been around for a while. Does that make sense? And what's interesting is that there can be times in a market, if you look into a market more deeply, if you see a market, for instance, where the days on market is 32, or 33, let's go with San Jose. If you look more deeply into that and you realize, obviously, those are only numbers based on what has sold. If you then look at the existing inventory, unsold inventory in a market like that and figure out how many days they've been on the market, some of them, so that average number is always way higher than 33, not always. In many cases, that number ends up being way higher because you've got aging inventory with sellers that are unwilling to drop their price. And nothing is more sad than seeing someone agree to reduce their price late, right? So you're chasing the market downward. Now, is that something people should be concerned about now? Well, if we review home sales prices, right, we can see, aside from the county overall, they're all down. San Jose down 3.9%, Morgan Hill down 3.7%, Gilroy down 4.1%. So you never want to be that person that's chasing a price downward if you're trying to get your home sold. Okay. Next, this is now when we pivot. We are now looking straight back behind us in the rearview mirror. This isn't year to year. The red bars are past July's, just so we can calibrate ourselves to where we are versus where we were and see if from this we can anticipate where we're going to go. So first, we can see we've got total active listings right here. New listings is the green bar. Homes sold is the gray bar. Pending is the yellow bar. And remember, pending is a predictor of what's going to happen next month with sales. Now, if we look at this, we can see historically the arrangement's been a little bit different. Last year was a little bit different. Pendings was a little higher than solds, which resulted in a little bit of a peak, a little bit of a bump in homes sold the following month. And then we saw a decline in pending, but then homes sold went up. So there's interesting contradictions in terms of this predicting what's actually going to happen. And frequently, what makes that happen is a transaction that falls through for whatever reason. Whenever you see something like that, you want to think, what would have stopped a escrow from closing? And if you can't get access to any other data, assume financing was the problem. For some reason, financing didn't come through. And in times like that, back in 2025 and 2024, not an unusual thing to see happen. But in terms of what we've seen, absolutely look at the total number of active listings. This is it in July. This is it in July. This is it in July. A steady increase in overall inventory over time, comparing it year to year. The drop, the low point is here. That's just still higher than the low point here. And we don't have, October, November, December for these months, but trust me, it'll be lower than that. So as we move forward, what should we expect to see? I think that typically from here, we see a drop in inventory as the final homes from July close in August, right? and the inventory then falls to December. And this is all very normal, right? Once we get through August and we calculate out the homes that were made an offer in July and got closed in August, we see this decline. Nobody wants to go on the market in the wintertime. And then we suddenly see an increase where we tend to peak. In this particular case, we peaked in April. Here we peaked in April. But we tend to see a jump after December as homes go on the market and sales, new listings increase as folks go on the market. Look at that big jump. Look at that big jump from December to January. From December to January. This is a semi-new thing. It's new. It's in geologic terms, it's new. I mean, it used to be, we used to see this big jump happen a little later. It used to be a little bit more delayed, and then we see our peak here in April, May, June, right? As folks want to get sold in June. June is sold as the month to get sold. But I've made the argument before that actually you want to do this in January. The probability of you getting the most for your home in many markets is actually by selling in January, February, rather than in June, July. But anyway, so where we're likely to go next in terms of new listings, we can see that we actually bucked the trend. We had an increase, an uptick in new listings. This is why I kind of paused on that, because new listings is a little weird to see it go up between June and July. You can notice here between June and July of last year, it dropped and then continued to drop. From here, I think it drops further. Because in order for me to suggest otherwise, I'd have to be saying that there is some sort of market influence that is pushing sellers to want to sell their home more. Now, whenever the broad opinion of sellers is that the market's about to tank, we'll see something like that, where we'll see a uncharacteristic boost in the number of homes that get listed for sellers that are like, wow, you know what, it's time to cash out and get what I can for this place. Oftentimes that's not the smartest move, simply because when you're a seller in a market, you also become a buyer in a market. So unless you're going to a completely different market, it can often not make sense. But that segment of the market who realizes they're going somewhere else, that's a completely different reality profile for the homes, would make a decision like that. So you'll see these artificial upticks, not artificial, you'll see these unusual, uncharacteristic upticks in the number of homes being listed when something like that's going on. I'm not hearing that from anybody. Every week I talk to all different kinds of people who want to sell their home. That's not what I'm hearing. I am hearing stuff about wanting to move out of the state, but I'm not hearing stuff like I think the market's going to crash. That's not what I'm tending to hear. I'm tending to hear a lot of politically motivated, I don't want to live here anymore because stuff's going off the rails kind of talk, right? So they're going to move. So I got people going to Idaho. I got people going to Tennessee. I got people going to Florida. I got people going to Texas. But not in a panic mode, more of a, this is the time and we're going to do it kind of a thing. Next, let's go ahead and talk about homes sold. We can see it's dropping. It dropped from June to July. It dropped from June to July in 2025. It dropped from June to July in 2024. So my guess is it's going to continue that trend. And normally what happens is it flattens and declines a little. Last year was a little weird. It stayed flat for a little bit and then boosted in October. I think it's going to continue to drop. With maybe a little bit of a bump in October. There always seems to be this weird little bump in October, or at least a little bit. So, but I think overall we're going to see a downward trend. And then in terms of pending, we can see it. Last year it stayed flat. Year before it stayed kind of flat with a little bit of a decline. I say, given the slope here, because look at that. Look at this slope we've got versus the slope we've had before. We had the slope here, but it stalled and flattened. We had the slope here, but it stalled and kind of flattened out a little bit. It wouldn't surprise me if we continue to see a decline here on the rate of being a little bit more than what we saw the past 2 years. So that equals lower sales in the months following, right? So I think we're going to continue. And it obviously dropped here, so I would expect to see a drop in sales next month. And then I would consider that pending is going to continue to be part of that drop moving forward to the end of the year. Sales price versus list price. Average original list price is now higher than average sales price. It's always interesting when these things cross each other. When you see a market in pivot. So expectations versus reality. expectations went much higher than reality for this month. Next, this is the percent of asking price number, just sort of put out month over month. And you can see we peaked way back in March of 2024, and then in February of 2025. And notice, interestingly, I know the Rent Hacker asked about this, and this is another sexy chunk of this particular piece of data. Note where the peaks are. Are any of those peaks in June or July? No, they're not. In fact, one could argue the worst time of year to sell your home if you're trying to get over asking price is June and July, right? Right? Is that what those numbers tell you? Now, obviously, there's you get December and January kind of coming at the same time, which implies properties that closed after taking offers in November and December. But I sure don't see the sexiness that everyone says is living in July in terms of amount over asking price. Now, why does everyone say June and July is the time? Because there's the largest number, the largest volume of homes, which then usually translates to the largest number of sales. So again, if you want to take advantage of numbers like this and this, what do you need to be? Well, you need to be a good example of a property in your class. If you're a 3-bedroom, 2-bath home, you need to be move-in ready, no crazy stinky things, well landscaped, fresh paint, maybe some new carpet if necessary. You don't need to go crazy. Normally, I don't think that remodeling your kitchen is going to have the financial payoff to warrant that expense and burden for that. But if you're a good example of the home in the market at that price range, this is probably what's going to happen to you. You're probably going to see multiple offers, right? So this is a chart I actually bring out during my listing presentations when I'm talking to people. And just to kind of communicate to them that so many agents are going to push them to do stuff during a certain time of the year that may not make sense for them, particularly when I start presenting this data in the context of their local market. Their local market. Because it's not always the case. June, July is not always the case. Interesting. The percent over asking is higher in the winter, early spring. Do you think the asking prices are lower in those off-peak months? No, they are not. They do not tend to be. We've done these numbers before. In terms of let's see, what would we have to go back to if we look at sales price? Yada yada yada. I think this one. Yeah. So you see some. Look at this is average list price. Look at the list price. That's January, February, right? That's a peak, baby. It tends to ramp up. Now it tends to go down October, November, December because there's so little activity, but it tends to go up as soon as we get into a market where there's activity. And then take a look at let's look at June, July. That looks a little bit lower compared to January, doesn't it? So no, it doesn't. And I actually have agents who've reached out to me getting mad at me for talking about this. I get agents mad at me all the time though, so I kind of enjoy it. It's like sweet nectar. But no one bothers to really look at the frickin' numbers. All right, so we just did percent of asking price. Now let's do days on market. Again, no surprises here at all, right? This is where it was in 2024 in July. This is where it was in 2025. Obviously, it's been steadily increasing. The trends are identical. Even that weird little peak. It happened a month earlier, but that weird little peak, right? And then this peak in December, simply because something started to sell towards the very end of the year, and then and this year it was just January, which is super normal. Again, indicating you're selling off a lot of inventory that's accumulated in that month, so suddenly that number jumps and then goes way down, because now what's happening is you've sold off a ton of inventory that had been around forever because of new buyer activity, and then new folks get listed, and then they sell quickly. Boom, see, and then it goes down. What we're going to see here is the same exact thing. We're going to see a ramping up with maybe a bump in it somewhere, maybe September, October, and then it's going to peak in December, January, and then it's going to drop. Just the way it is. Okay. Percent of listings with reduced prices. So this was how much of the total inventory had a price reduction. Again, we're going to pause on Gilroy because I think it's interesting. So last month in Santa Clara County overall, 28% of homes had a price reduction. This month, 26% had a price reduction. The year-over-year change was 8%. So 8% more homes had a price reduction compared to the same time last year. In San Jose, last month, 30% of homes had a price reduction. 26%, and we're going to talk about the rationale behind this in a minute. 26% in San Jose had a price reduction for an overall 5% increase from the same time last year. Morgan Hill, 32% last month had a price reduction. 34% this month had a price reduction. Year over year, that was a 10% increase of the total number of homes that had a price reduction. Let me pause here just for a second because it's one of the few ones where this number actually went up. What happens? The reason why you have price reductions is because homes don't sell. A seller wants to sell a house. A real estate agent lists their home at a certain price. It sits for a certain amount of time, and at some point, panic sets in. And some of that panic will be fed by watching other homes sell, and some of that panic will be fed by the perception in their brain that if it doesn't get sold by August, they are screwed, right? Because that's the way it's been sold is the time. Now let's look at Gilroy. 40% of homes, almost half of homes last month had a price reduction. This suggests a market slow enough that buyers or sellers were like, oh crap, we really got to lower our price. This month, in July, 27%. So a huge drop in the number of sellers that had to do a price drop. Makes sense because there was already a huge price adjustment in the marketplace. But overall, this is 4% less than it was a year ago. Again, feeding that whole Gilroy's more calibrated to the market kind of vibe. But the key takeaway here is you're going to tend to see these numbers increasing a bit when you go into June and July, depending on how long the home's been on the market. Usually a seller, in my mind, two things happen to a seller, right? Once they hit 30 days, they start to go, holy crap, our house hasn't sold. We haven't even had an offer. The paranoia sets in. And at that 30-day mark, what I've noticed is that sellers are more open to aggressively priced offers after that first 30 days than they were at 29 days. 30 days is a magic number. So you, as Mr. Rent Hacker, or Mrs., I don't want to assume, you probably know that. You probably know that you might reach out to somebody in the first few weeks of a listing and say, hey, would you take a little bit more of an aggressive offer? I see that there's some challenges with the property. It looks like your foundation is moving 4 different directions. It looks like the last time I had a style upgrade was 1973. That kind of stuff. There's a different response to you at day 31 versus day 29, right? And the Rent Hacker asks, do you think that 40% reduced price in Gilroy last month is related to the area's higher days on market? So I don't think that's an unreasonable assumption. So 40% of homes had a price reduction, and then there was a big jump in sales, which would create a boost in days on market as inventory gets sold off. I like that. Yeah, I think that makes total sense. But price reductions are interesting, and for a person like you, the goal is to get to a property before they reduce the price, or not, right? It depends. You're going to do the math, right, and figure out where things are. If the home needs to be at a certain price for it to make sense for you as someone who's going to be an investor, you may have to roll the dice and hope that after their price reduction, they still continue to get no attention, and then you can negotiate from that number downward, right? Okay. So that covers all the numbers. That covers all of the sexiest numbers. I am always looking for sexy numbers. If anyone thinks there's a sexy number that I didn't cover in this, please let me know. I'd be happy to add it to the flow. Let's see here. What else have we got? Now we've got the other stuff. Let me there we go. That's the browser stuff. But I always like to pause here. I've got a couple of folks in the stream right now. Feel free to ask a question if you got. I'm going to have a drink of coffee. I'm a lightweight when it comes to caffeine, so every time I do this, I'm getting like a big boost. Oh, yeah. Okay. So we were having a conversation about rent for houses earlier. I think during the pre-show? Let's go with zip codes. Zip codes is better. But I know this might be something for the rent hacker. What's going on? I did zip. Come on, baby. But what's great about this tool is by the nature of the fact I do this, obviously it's not limited to people who live that in an area I can serve them. Why is it not doing zip code? I clipped zip code. Let's see, for sale inventory. Let's look at that. So that's the total number of available homes. Let's see, home value growth year over year with a 1.2% project. Home price forecast, down 4%. It's interesting to note where they think things are going to go down. I mean, this area of South San Jose, I've done so much business around here. It kind of blows my mind that these are areas where the projection is that they're going to see reductions in prices here. One of my best friends actually lives. I think I sold him something like right there. Anyway, if you've got any questions, happy to ping them through the tool. If not, I can move on to some of the other stuff here. I only have a handful of news items, and then we're going to do a little mortgage rate comparison. So sales surged 7% in July nationally. Our sales actually went down 2%. So compared to the national average, we have a 9% delta between us and them, where they are seeing a surge and we're not. Let me scroll down to their home row year over, and they're doing year over year, which is the right way to do it. Strongest annual gain of the year, according to Zillow's July market report. This largely represents transactions in which an offer was accepted in June. Thank you for pointing that out. I so frequently yell at these guys for A, doing month to month, which is dumb, and B, not pointing out that this actually reflects actions that took place the month before. I think that's all great. Let's see if they said anything else dumb. New pending listings, a leading indicator of future closings, grew just 0.3% from a year ago and fell 7.7% from June. Which is yes, right? And again, they should acknowledge that's a seasonal influence that happens almost all the time. Inventory sits at 1.5 above year ago levels. Our inventory is up 6% in the county. So yeah, that's how we compare kind of the national stuff. From Redfin, the number of U.S. homebuyers just dropped to a record low, shifting the market further in buyers' favor. So I think it's important to understand that when they say dropped to a record low, they mean the number of people who actually actively made an offer. I don't think I think it gives a false impression. I think it means there was the number of U.S. home buyers willing to make an offer dropped to a record low. Because I don't think they're the same thing. Because clearly I've got an awful lot of people who are still looking for homes using my search tool, but they're waiting for something that fits their criteria. So it's not that the buyers aren't out there ready to do something. They're waiting for the right set of circumstances. And absolutely, part of this can be interest rates. Part of this can be just what prices are at in general. But given the number of people who I have actively checking the data every single week, I haven't seen a drop in the number of people doing that. It hasn't gone up as much as past years, but it's gone up. So that one kind of stood out at me. It might be a completely esoteric thing to point out, but I did it anyway. Here's the weekly housing trends. I like to scroll down to their summary here. Median list prices down 2%. List prices for us were up 10.8%. And this is year to date, so we're not getting year to year, but it's close as we can get. New listings down 0.1%. Our new listings were up 13%. Active listings up 4.6%. Ours was up 6%. Time on market 2 days slower. Days on market for us was 23% higher. What do you actually use for rent comps on a 2 to 4 unit in San Jose? Zip averages never seem to match real buildings. Well, and particularly if you're talking multi-unit. None of those tools are built for a multi-unit research thing. Those are tougher, obviously, because there's fewer of them. The good news is there shouldn't be. Sometimes there is. Like, right, let's say dad owned this property and now the kids have inherited it. They're trying to sell it and there's like a weird emotional thing in there. But it's math, right? You get all the expenses as disclosed by the seller. You figure out what things you can do. Are there things you can do? Are there obsolescences that you can address in the units to make them get more rent? In a market where there are projections that rent is going to go down. I know when I make offers on multifamilies for my clients, I absolutely wave the flag of, hey, it's projected that rents are going to go down, right? Look at all these big places, particularly if you on the 85 corridor of those gigantic rental places, they've got huge banners out. Hey, X number of months for free TV, free whatever to sign a lease. So for you, it's a math problem, right? In terms of, so I always start there, right? Finding out what a 4-unit in San Jose went for 2 or 3 blocks away may or may not be relevant for you. That other unit may have been completely upgraded. Someone may have gone in there and said, wow, all right, this place is freaking ancient. So we're going to put a laundry situation, a washer and dryer in every unit. We are improving everything, right? We're painting, we're doing all these things, we're updating the kitchens, we're updating the bathrooms. If that all happened in this other one, but not in yours, and you're basing it on comps, if you don't know the details of the comps, and boy, good luck getting an agent to have a chat with you about another thing that's sold. So there's a variety of ways you can solve this problem. Yes, you can absolutely use comps, but you need to answer the questions. What was its condition when acquired? What was the condition of the property at time of sale? What were the correlating expenses? All the various things, right? What's the age of the roof? What's the age of the utilities, water heaters, all the various things, right? Because those are all real things. And then your target property is, what is its current condition? What are the elements of obsolescence that you as a property owner are going to have to deal with this property? And then you have to adjust for those two things. But again, it should come down to, for each unit, I can get X amount of rent, and this is how much my carrying cost would be. If you can't carry that debt with that rent, then that, and if let's say you pick a minimum, I need to make this amount on my invested funds on this property. So you've got, say, I don't know, whatever your mortgage requirements are, then you've got landscaping, and then you've got potentially management things. I don't know if you're a hands-on person who likes to personally manage. 2 to 4 units, yeah, I have plenty of clients who personally manage those. Anything over 8, I start to see my folks going more towards property managers who are going to want a percentage. But if you want 10% profit off of your investment, which I don't think is crazy. In fact, given the higher potential risks involved, yeah, I think 10% is totally reasonable. I know guys who won't do it for less than 15%. But just do the math and let the math spit out what the home is worth or what the property is worth. Of course, it's all going to depend on how you finance, right? But yeah, it's about cash flow, man. It's all about cash flow. Zip average, don't go with the zip averages. I find that you kind of have to manually go and dig in and find stuff simply because it seems like none of these tools were designed to satisfy the needs of investors. Bigger Pockets has some interesting tools. I don't know if you use them. You might want to check them out. I haven't used them in a while, but I know they had this awesome calculator thing where you just plug in all the details of the property, expenses, everything. And even might help you catch things you normally would forget to account for. And then at the end spits out whether it's worth it or not, whether it makes any sense, what the return on investment was. And that's biggerpockets.com if you want to check that out. Hey, I happen to have the internet right in front of me. That's my old investment property in Hawaii. I sold that a couple years ago. But anyway, let's see if they still have the tool here. Rental property calculator. Am I pro anymore? Am I still a pro? But anyway, so it's got all the stuff, right? And it'll help you figure it all out. It's definitely worth your time. So feel free to use that. Thanks for asking, though. I'm glad. It's a good chance for me to share with some other folks. All right, let's move on. July 2026 CPI slows to 3.4%, but mortgage rates hit a 2026 high. Okay, we're halfway through 2026. Do the highs tend to, yeah. Again, we're going to look at all that stuff. I put this in here just to sort of earmark the whole, what do we talk about in terms of interest rates. All right, so the average sales price in San Jose was $1,482,000. So let's go and just kind of put it right in the real ballpark here. All right. So again, I like to point this out. Look at the number of products we have. Think of this like you're shopping on Amazon and you just did a search for a product. Check it out. I mean, we've looked at this before where it was 2 options, 3 options. So they're hot to lend. There's plenty of folks out there hot to lend. 6.3, relatively low fees. Here's one, 10,000 in fees. But here's where we're at, about 6.393. Let's see here. Yeah. We're doing single family. No points. But yeah, plenty of options. It's still crazy. I mean, the idea that you're buying a house and when you're done, you have to come up with $7,500 a month in mortgage payments is absolutely ridiculous, which is where folks like the Rent Hacker come in who are going to potentially have a property for you where you're going to be able to pay substantially less than that per month. Let's see. And then we already kind of looked at this tool. Again, love this tool. It's great to answer big picture questions. Finally, my place. If you just enter your address right there, you can then click check and it'll bring up the estimated value of your home. This is powered by a company called HomeBot. For those of you who've known me for a long time, every year I do a tech review of the tools that I use with my clients. And I haven't had to change these guys in 3 years, I think is what it's been. Why do I like their home value estimation tool more than others like Zillow? Let me tell you a story about a house. So, and this stuff pisses me off just unbelievably. So let's say you live in a neighborhood and you are looking up the Zillow estimates, the Zestimates for different homes in your neighborhood, just for giggles. Your house, someone else's house, whatever. And so in your head, you kind of know what these numbers are. Well, then let's say magically one of the houses you've been tracking goes on the market, and it goes on the market for like $300,000 over what the Zestimate was. Go check that Zestimate again, and you're going to find that magically the Zestimate is now extremely close to what the list price is, if not the same number or even higher, with the only new data being it's listed for sale. Now, to be fair, you could argue, well, Zillow got the MLS information, so it knows more. Maybe there was square footage information or features that weren't previously in the database. But I know how they scrape this data, and the odds are that data was already there, particularly for houses that have sold within the last 10 years. You know that they already had all that data from the last listing. But you'll magically find this happen across the board. You'll find it with Redfin, Trulia, obviously with Trulia because it's the same people as Zillow. But you'll find that it happens across the board. Even in some third-party ones, they'll suddenly give you a value estimate that goes up because the home is listed for more money than it was originally listed for. This does not do that. I have noted it might shift a little, but it shifts a little from month to month anyway, based on market activity. And I think that you are better served as a homeowner with a honest tool than a tool that tries to fluff your expectations. Now, granted, if there are like zero comparables for a property, can we see that happen organically? Absolutely. The Rent Hacker, perfect example. You put in an address that's a 4-unit multifamily, particularly in something like Zillow, yeah, nothing. Do your clients... Rent Hacker just asked another question. How long ago? 3 minutes ago. Sorry, apologies. Do your clients actually pay for BP Pro to unlock results, or does everyone just rebuild it in a spreadsheet? So I don't have any clients that pay for BP Pro. Well, no, that's not true. If we're talking about clients like you would be, right? Like multi-unit investor people. Yeah, they tend to pay for BP Pro. I paid for BP Pro for a while. And then I got an application called Property Evaluator that I just run on my Mac that lets me do it. And it lets me poop out a very pretty little report, which I may have to stop using because with the latest OS update, like within the last week, I went to create a report and it wouldn't work. I'm hesitant to click the app because I don't want it to cause any shenanigans. But yeah, I do have some folks that do that. Once you get to a certain level though, like not like a one-person operation, once you get to like the corporate people, they've got like crazy thousands of dollars worth of software that do stuff. In fact, we could even do a show about some of the annoying crap that they do to kind of do price fixing on a lot of that stuff. But anyway, yeah, and I think what is BP Pro going for now? I don't even know what it costs. It used to be not that big of a deal. $312 a year. So that's actually not bad. And as I said, I did do it for an awful long time. There was a period of time there where I was doing an awful lot of multifamily stuff. However, your question about, or does everyone just rebuild it in a spreadsheet? I find the older the person is, the more likelihood that they're doing it in a spreadsheet. Which works. I mean, spreadsheets can be amazing, right? The stuff you can do in a spreadsheet is no different. It's just, I think if you were a smart cookie, you go ahead and you pay for BP Pro for a while. You take a look at all the stuff that's happening in BP Pro. You reproduce it in a spreadsheet. And if all you're ever using is that particular tool, Or today, in the modern world, what would I do? If I wanted to do it and I didn't want to pay BP Pro, I would get Claude AI or the AI of your choice and say, let's create an app. And then have it do and walk through it with it to have it create one for you. I have done this for numbers of things. I had a thing with my website that I wanted to do, so I created a widget for my website using AI prompts to do it. And that's another topic we could have a discussion about over an adult beverage, is how to use AI, because most people use it wrong. And it's true, I guess, of human nature, right? You want to do something, if you can eliminate work, or if you can completely stop doing work because you can delegate it to an AI, they do it. And in real estate, this is totally a thing. I get pinged daily by different companies that want to take over X, Y, or Z of my business with AI. And having AI do things on your behalf, or agentic AI is what we're talking about. I am not comfortable with that, because I have seen what AI does when left to do it itself, and it is frequently stupid. But I've been pinged. You can have a setup right now where you never communicate directly with your client until the AI has detected that they're ready to go, right? But the AI will pretend to be you. You can set up the AI to use your voice. You can set up an avatar that looks like you to handle texting with them. They can have all kinds of conversations with what they think is you. It's actually an AI. And I know that, and that works probably on some segment of the population. I'm pretty good at sniffing out an AI working on me, so I am unimpressed with that crap. But any level of competency that you derive from your interpretation of your interactions with their AI absolutely doesn't translate. So I know some morons in real estate, and trust me when I say the number of morons in real estate is disproportionate to the number of morons in the population. Another comment. I know now I'm going to get angry messages from real estate agents, but here's the bottom line. It's too easy to become a real estate agent, and a lot of very dumb people become real estate agents. And if they're good at the marketing part, they can. The sad news is the people who are really good at the actual business of doing real estate as a real estate broker or agent aren't always the best at self-promotion. And in fact, some of the reasons why they're so good at the business of real estate is because they're not self-promoters. But when you're 100% a self-promoter, when that's all that you do, you can get the signatures in the living rooms, and then you just throw stuff against the wall and hope that stuff sticks. You just let the market do the business. Sorry, that's a shiny thing for me. That is the reason I started my podcast, was frustrations over how real estate agents do business. But anyway, and it just gets worse every year. Okay, anyway, so that's it. So my last pitch here was finding the value of your home. But I always suggest to my clients that they do certain things at the end of every year to just assess the value of their home. Where does their home sit in terms of value, in terms of usability, leverage, those kinds of things. And this tool will do it. Now, it doesn't ask for your email address. It just gives you the estimate of the value of your home. That's it. Because I want you to have that option. I want you to move through life without feeling like you have to give me your email address. I don't want to con you into talking to me. I want you to want to talk to me because our interests align. Having said that, what this tool will also do is, in addition to every month giving you an email with the assessed value of your home or the estimated value of your home, it does that. It does the whole value estimator thing. And it'll give you a little history of where it's been and where it's at. It'll also give you how much equity, what you could do with it, details on how to actually take action on that fact. If you bought another home, how much could you afford? It gives you some planning tools. Look at that, back in the old days when Robbie had a beard. Well, no, I guess I'm growing one again. What could you would refining your house make sense? If it did make sense, these numbers would be green. See, and there'd be green check marks here. So it's just telling you, don't do it. If it gives you green stuff and you do learn more about this, I have established a partnership with a local lender right here in Morgan Hill for you to have a conversation with them and see if it makes sense for you. If you pay just X amount more each month, you could save. So great planning there. What you've paid so far towards principal, towards interest. Over the 30-year loan, you'll pay X amount in interest. What's important now, thinking of selling, you have 3 strong selling signals. You might have up to $1.44 million in purchasing power for a new home. You could use about $144K of equity to feel more ready for a storm. Quick check. We found these loans from public records. Is that right? View calculations. So basically, it's transparency in the current situation with your home loan, with your equity, your property. This tool is awesome, right? So it lets you sort of play with numbers. What if I rented, right? Nightly rate, monthly rate, number of nights, just all kinds of cool stuff. So it gives you these options to sort of just throw out ideas around and see if they make sense for you. And then that's the first thing. So anyway, so that's what this tool will give you. You're not going to get pestered. You're going to get added to my newsletter list. But I promise you, that's a once a month thing. I am not a poke you with a stick guy every week. I want you to not forget me. So once a month, you might get pestered with a newsletter, and then this once a month. So anyway, so that's about it. I hope you felt like this was a valuable use of your time. If you've got any more questions, feel free to drop them in the chat as we wrap up. I'm happy to revisit anything we've covered here. I guess for this part, I should go where you can see my whole face here. Yeah, look at that. See, there I am. Anyway, and my lava lamp. My lava lamp's in a new spot compared to previous shows. Anyway, if you've got any questions, feel free. Okay, when the app spits out the pretty report, what's the 1 second section your clients actually flip to before deciding what makes a report trustworthy versus fluff? That's great. God, I love questions like that. It's data, right? In other words, in my world, if I'm suggesting an action, like listing at a certain time and date, or for a certain price, or doing certain things to your home, I should be able to back it up with data that logically feeds the conclusion that I'm coming to and proposing to you, right? So now that's my take. My reports are more trustworthy because of good data. Sadly, I think an awful lot of people I talk to, their interaction with me is their first introduction to that kind of thing. Real estate agents tend to be far more about the fluff. And far more about like sweeping generalizations or conclusions based on data that isn't actually super relevant to that house, but magically are super relevant to feeding whatever narrative they want to create to get you to sign on the dotted line. And I know that sounds just really negative, and it is, but it's also the truth. So yeah, in terms of what they turn to first, I hate to say it, which page has the prettiest pictures on it? I guess is kind of the first thing, sort of. Yeah. But usually as I'm walking them through this report, and so there's the word report, I'm assuming links to the last time I used the word report, which was I have this cool little piece of software that'll poop out a report that analyzes investments. Now, when I'm dealing with someone who's a seasoned investor, that's a totally different thing. They get that the data is the thing, right? I mean, you sound like someone who by necessity is a numbers person, right? Because you have to be in order for this stuff to work. You don't buy a income producing property based on the feels. You base it on the math of whether or not it makes sense. So that's what you're looking for. Within that circle of buyers, investors, I'm super comfortable because I'm a very low BS kind of guy. When it comes, we got a couple more people joined us. Welcome to it. If you have a question to ask, please do so. So that's just kind of the way it is. And that's what you should demand, right? You as a seller, regardless of whether you're an investor or not, the data needs to be the thing. If you're telling me to do things that involve hundreds of thousands of dollars and millions of dollars and potentially the biggest financial influence on my life as a seller, if you're not bringing good data to the table, you're just bringing your feels. Well, shit. Good luck. And particularly when things get more weird, right? Are things getting more weird? Yeah, things are getting a little weird. Right? The time of, regardless of what you do, if you throw it into the marketplace, it's just going to sell immediately. It's not happening anymore right now in most markets. So for me, it's all about the rationality of decisions based on data. And that's also a tough conversation, right? So let's say I'm talking to a seller who really believes that their house, perfect example. Oh, yeah. So this is going back a ways. This is like 90s, late 90s, I think. I had a client who wanted to sell her house. And she loved her house, but it was too big. She was all alone and she needed to go to a new place. And I don't remember if she was divorced or widowed, but she needed to get out. So as you opened the two double doors for the entry into the home, you were greeted by a gigantic mural of a fantasy setting, like Lord of the Rings kind of stuff. Before the movie The Lord of the Rings came out. Well, before the one we all know and love came out. All right, so that was number one. And that was sort of a rounded wall that then, and it was centered on this great room right behind it. And as you went around into this great room, there was this tree. And I'm trying to, I don't think it was a real tree. I think it was like a built tree that came up out of the hardwood floor and went all the way up to and it had these super high ceilings, but it was meant to be like a elvish thing. So there was all this elvish themes and it had interesting lighting in it and stuff. And she thought this was going to sell like in a heartbeat. But it was right in the middle of the great room. And I had to say, listen, I get it. I'm a guy, I have some weird stuff. I have an enterprise in my office. I get it, right? So I understand that people can be into stuff. But I had to explain to her that several things are going to happen. One, she needs to paint over the mural. And two, we really should get rid of the tree before we try to sell the house. Because if we don't, it's going to take forever. Is there someone out there who wants a elvish tree growing out of the middle of their living room and a huge mural at the entry? Yes. But as a percentage of local population that would be interested in buying a house, how many of those folks would want that? And this can't be the first time she's heard it. Somebody must have come over her house and gone, what the hell is this tree doing in the middle of your house? So yeah, I mean, it's, but she thought because these things were there, it represented a higher value rather than something she needed to remedy in order to sell. So that was a hard conversation. I felt really bad having it because she loved this stuff. Other conversations I've had that are less impactful, right? Getting rid of a tree in the middle of your living room. Yeah, that's a big deal. And that's going to cost some money. Other things, Disney people. I don't even like the way I said it, but you go into, and they have display cases lining every wall filled with Disney stuff. And once you tell them we should really put this stuff in storage, not just because it's Disney stuff, but because it's personal tchotchkes and memorabilia that are impeding mobility within the space, taking up room, making the room feel smaller, right? So anyway, that was another. There's so many of them. These are nice people. These are good, and to have to tell them something that might make them cry later. That's not cool. But it's you got to be honest. Would I have this Disney crap in my house? This Disney stuff in my house? Some of it, absolutely. Would I have it there while I'm trying to sell it? No. My saying is we sell a house differently from the way we live in a house. So, all right. Any other questions? It looks like I'm willing to bet the only person, everyone else is left. So the only person left is the rent hacker. So my ramblings have only been interesting to the rent hacker. This is breaking my heart. Anyway, oh wow, holy mackerel! It's 11:40. The shiny things in the weeds have extended the show by 40 minutes. All right, folks, that's about it. I hope this has been useful for you. If you'd like to reach out, feel free to find me at soldbyrobert.com. Check out my great tools for tracking the value of your home and your current situation, equity, and all that kind of wonderful stuff. And if you're interested in buying, selling, or investing in real estate, you can reach out to me there as well. So thanks again for spending your Saturday morning with me. I will see you guys next month.